Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about our LIFE Moor Space Fund. I think we're just going to kick off now, and people will join as they arrive. So today we're going to be talking about the LIFE Moor Space Fund, which is funded by the EU LIFE, and we'll be talking about three stories of peatland restoration. Unfortunately, we've had a last-minute dropout that we couldn't replace, so it'll be three stories of peatland restoration plus I'll talk about our LIFE Moor Space project. The cameras and mics are going to stay off, but if anyone has any questions, you can pop these into our QA box, and we'll either answer these as we go through, or we will come to them at the end if they need a bit of a longer-winded answer. So in terms of an agenda, I'll talk about the Moor Space Fund and the LIFE Moor Space project. I should probably say I'm Lewis. I'm the technical officer on the LIFE Moor Space project. And then we will be hearing from Philip Thorpe on Moorlinch Kings Sedgemoor, James O'Brien on Chat Moss, and Howard Jones on Calthorpe Broad. And then we'll jump into the Q&A at the end to answer any outstanding questions. So the LIFE Moor Space Fund is a pot of money in the overall funding for the LIFE Moor Space project. That is 54,000 in total of EU LIFE funding, with a maximum of £10,800 per project. So this was advertised internally within Natural England and externally through our partners to try and bring in anyone that was interested. We were looking for sites of around over 12 hectares of lowland peatland that would support either a degraded raised bog that was capable of natural regen, or a lowland peatland site with 30 centimetres of moor of peat across 50% of the site. So that's what we were looking to fund, and they would replicate any kind of activity that we have done through the LIFE Moor Space project. So the LIFE Moor Space project is across almost, is across sites of almost 3,000 hectares of lowland raised bog near Doncaster. So this is let me get my laser pointer. We're part of the Humberhead Peatlands NNR, which is Thorn Moors here, and then the sister site is Hatfield Moors. And we're in partnership with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. We are the second LIFE project on the moors. We've got the That's LIFE project, which ran from 2014 to 2019. And now we're doing the LIFE Moor Space project which ran from 2021 till the end of 2027. So we're on the kind of back end of the project now, with a lot of the works having been completed. So what have we got up to? We have planted almost 40,000 plug plants between sphagnum and cotton grass across the Goolmore area, which is up here, which is our main project site. And this is to revegetate some areas of bare peat, which we've been struggling to revegetate. So here we have an example of one of them, and we did some cotton grass and sphagnum planting all along the edges with a big patch here, and then all around these islands and along this edge here. And we've been planting the cotton grass in a diamond pattern with 1 hare's tail cotton grass to 3 common cotton grass plants, and we do that in March, and then in September, October time, we'd come back and we'd put sphagnum plugs in the middle of those diamonds. So the cotton grass affords a bit of protection to the fragile sphagnum mosses and helps them survive a bit better. And then this is the same bare peat area in the winter, and we've got tolerable levels of water here for the the plugs to survive. But we also put in this silver birch dead hedge through the middle just to disrupt some of that wave action, and stop the waves washing away the fragile sphagnum mosses. What else have we done? So we've just started some bog plant translocation. We've been looking to move some of the higher bog plants like roundleaf sundew, bog rosemary, bog cranberry, and crossleaf heath. So we've taken from areas down here called Southern Canals and moved them up to the Moor project area, where there is limited numbers, if any at all. So we're trying to speed up that recovery. So we've just managed to move some crossleaf heath and some roundleaf sundew, and looking to do bog rosemary and bog cranberry in the future. So we've moved a few plants of each just to see how well they take, and then if they take quite well, then we've got a source of a way to move these plants across in the future. I should say the Moor area is the SSSI encapsulates more of this area, but the strips of land here in white are owned by external landowners. So we have to work in collaboration with them on any of the larger scale projects across the Moor area. We have put in a series of adjustable weirs. So we've got 7 adjustable weirs to help us manage the water in different hydrological cells, and then 14 new dip wells and 8 surface level change rods to monitor some of the changes in our hydrology. And finally, so in 2010 there was a big fire on Thorn Moors, which took about 50 firefighters to tackle it. So as part of this project, we have cut along, so this is Moor Tram, which is our main trackway through the site. And as you can see, there's lots of encroaching silver birch across that area. So we've cut 3.6 kilometers worth of fire breaks to open it up to, it's 4 meters on either side of the trackway, which hopefully will prevent any fires, if they do occur, jumping across that tram so easily. Obviously with hotter, drier summers, fires are becoming increasingly likely. So hopefully this little bit of proactive management will help us in the future. Our ideal scrub management is just to raise the water levels and allow the higher water table to deal with the scrub on site. But with the low-lying bare peat patches that we've been really struggling to revegetate, it's very hard to raise the water levels on such a large site without drowning out new vegetation in those lower spots. So we did 10 hectares of scrub removal over the course of the project, with a planned future management being higher water table to manage our scrub. We've done some drain clearance. Hopefully this is clear for you guys, but there's a whole network of drains across Thorn Moors from when they used to do peat harvesting, both mechanically and by hand. So there's a whole network of drains which drains water down into this main IDB drain along here. So as part of That's Life project, the previous Life project, a Archimedes screw pump was installed at the bottom of this main drain, which allows us to move off water during the winter when we've got too much of it. And then in the summer we often have too little. So it's a balancing act of moving water off in the winter to keep water levels at an ideal level, and then when it comes to summer, stopping that pumping before evapotranspiration kicks in and leaving enough water for us to sort of survive the summer with a high water table. So working with some of the external landowners that own strips into the moor, we cleared this drain, so we've got a better free running drain during the winter to move water off to stop drowning out any of our vegetation on those bare peat patches. And then finally, on to knowledge transfer, which is a big part of these projects, is sharing what we've learned and what we've done. So we're running 8 workshops and 4 webinars. This is the last webinar of that, and then we've done workshops on the large heath butterfly surveys and hydrology management, and then we've got some future ones on bog plant ID and invertebrate ID coming up, which should be really good. And then site visits. We went to Chat Moss recently and learned what they were doing there. And then we've had people come to our sites to find out what we're doing. So all that kind of stuff helps us improve, as probably you all will know. And then we've got our YouTube channel, our LIFE Moor Space YouTube channel, which has got 12 videos on already, and a few more planned before the end of the project, where we're sharing what we've been up to, including some of these webinars are on there as well. And finally, replication, which is why we're all here today, is to learn about our replication fund and what these other sites have done with the funding that we've given them. So I'm going to hand over to Philip for Moorlinch and Kings Sedgemoor.
Right, thanks, Lewis. So I'm just trying to take control. Right, come on. Yeah, so thank you, Lewis, and thank you again to the LIFE Moor Space Fund. So the money I received from LIFE acted as seed corn funding to enable me to deliver 2 Nature for Climate Peatland Grant Scheme projects on the Somerset levels and moors. Now, the aim of both projects was to arrest the rate of oxidising peat soils, plus improve conditions for breeding waders by achieving a high, stable groundwater table through improved hydrological conditions across 2 raised water level areas. Now, when the Somerset levels and moors are drained in the winter to increase their capacity to take winter flood waters, levels are maintained high within the isolated raised water level areas through the operation of tilting weirs. These areas, which are managed by the Somerset Internal Drainage Board, were created in the 1990s to benefit wetland wildlife within key portions of the catchment. It is now understood that their ability to hold onto winter water will play an important role in keeping peat soils wet throughout the year and reduce the rate carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Now on this slide here, this is my first project site, which is the Moorlinch carrot plot. Here on the screen is the Moorlinch raised water level area. It's 171 hectares in total, shown here in blue, with the 18-hectare carrot plot, which is an ex-arable site on peat soils, forming part of its own raised water level area in the southeast corner, shown there in grey. Right, I'm just on to the next slide. Right, so back in 2022, Wessex Water carried out restoration works on this area as it had been drying out. This included reinstating a perimeter peat bund. During excavation activities, particular consideration was required to avoid impacts to archaeological features shown in pink on the diagram attached. These included historical field systems. During a site visit at the end of the works, I observed an uncovered field drain, but this structure was not removed, as this action had not been agreed within the original scope of works. So in 2025, I secured NCPGS and LIFE funding to dig a trench to sever the land drains across this ex-arable site and remove water loss by this mechanism. Now, the route of the trench was just inside the perimeter bund, shown here as the red line, which I think you can see there on the edge of the map. Right, I'll go on to the next slide. So prior to works, a further archaeological assessment of the site was conducted and a toolbox talk given to the contractor due to the historical features on site. A triple SI assent was granted, with works occurring in September to minimise impacts to bird life. This is between the wintering and breeding wader period. The trench was dug with a low ground pressure excavator to 2 metres, with 10 drains between 75 mil and 300 millimetre diameter severed. Now, these drains could be found anywhere from sort of near the surface of the ground right down to 1.5 metres. I'm just going to, hopefully this will play play the video. You can just see this is one of the pipes that was discharging water, which has now been cut and removed. Right, I'm going to go on to my next slide. Right, so upon completion, the trench was backfilled with material from adjacent borrow pits and then compacted with the excavator bucket. Strip vegetation was then reinstated on top of the trench line. So dip well data of the groundwater table is still to be processed following completion of the project. However, standing water was widespread across the site last week. It was up to my ankles in areas, which is great. And we had common cranes we recorded feeding on this site. So all things initially started to look good. Right, go on to my next site. So next we've got Kings Sedgemoor, which was my second site. Kings Sedgemoor SSI pictured here is 822 hectares of protected land split into 13 hydrological blocks, 3 of which constitute the Kings Sedgemoor raised water level area. Right. So the Kings Sedgemoor raised water level area is 200 hectares of floodplain grazing marsh with ditches on peat soils. Now, in 2022, with funding from Natural England, the RSPB produced a report recommending the installation of AquaDelta T400 D2 solar-powered piston pumps to re-wet this raised water level area and improve habitat conditions for feeding waders, plus create a wetter, more favourable environment for peat soils. Now, these pumps would counteract evaporation within the ditch system, particularly within the dry summer months. And high water from these ditches would keep the adjacent peat soils wet. Now in 2024, 2 pumps, each capable of pumping 64 metre cubed of water per hour, were installed to pump water from the Kings Sedgemoor drain into the raised water level area. This is shown by the red arrow on the map. This was funded by the Somerset Coast Levels and Moors Nature Recovery Project. Now, in March 2076, 2 more pumps were installed within High Ham Reen, shown here by the green arrow. And these were funded through LIFE and NCPGS funding. So SSI assent, IDB consent, and an EA abstraction licence were granted for these projects. Right, I'm just going to go into my next slide. Right, so I spent it was about £49,000 on purchase and installation of the 2 pumps plus groundworks. In September 2025, the perimeter bund over which I pumped into the raised water level area from High Ham Reen was reinforced with metal sheet piling, with the spot within the Reen where the pump was to be sited was deepened and levelled to create a suitable base. Now in March 2026, AquaDelta installed these pumps, fixing them into place with 6 metre long scaffold poles into the clay bed beneath the deep peat. So the peat on this site is reaching about sort of 5 metres in areas. So 10 solar panels were installed and fenced off to protect them from the cattle. The pumps are operated remotely by an app, and there is a float switch to turn them off should the water within an abstraction point become too low. 2 mm fish screening was installed as European eel are present on this site. The outlet pipes are positioned to the centre of the ditch to minimise potential erosion of the ditch banks when discharging. And should the ditch system within the raised water level area reach capacity following pumping, water will flow out of the tilting weir into Othery Reen, which then feeds back into the Kings Sedgemoor drain. Right, now I'm going to go to my other slide. So here, you can all see this. So this video shows the 2 pumps that were installed back in 2024, operating last year. So the newly installed 2026 pumps have the same discharge rate and together will keep the ditch water levels high within the raised water level area throughout the year. Now, stilling wells and dip wells were installed across Kings Sedgemoor and Moorlinch in 2025 to monitor ditch water levels and groundwater levels. Now, in conjunction with vegetation monitoring, This data will be used to assess the success of these projects and identify whether further interventions are required to maintain high groundwater tables within these sites. This is a key outcome for the Greater Sedgemoor Landscape Recovery Project, within which both sites are located. Now, there's early indications, should this recovery project get the green light, that we will receive partnership support from this project to maintain these systems. So I'm hoping that this should have some longevity behind it. Okay, thank you. That's enough from me.
Right, yes, so I'm James, a reserve manager at Natural England, based at Moss Side Farm, which is part of the Risley, Holcroft and Chatmoss National Nature Reserve. I'll just explain a little bit about the background of Moss Side Farm, the wider NNR, and just to provide some context really on the restoration works that we're undertaking, and also how obviously the LIFE Fund project was aided in this. So on, yeah, so the National Nature Reserve is situated and named after 3 lowland peat masses within the northwest of England. It's made up of 7 partners across 11 different sites. Our Moss Side Farm consists of 154 hectares plus the buildings which we purchased in 2022 that have previously been used for agriculture, most recently very intensive agriculture, and essentially it's situated slap bang in the middle of the Chatmoss peat extent, which I'll talk more about now. Yeah, so this is Moss Side Farm. Essentially, it consists of this land here, the sort of blue shaded area, and it was, like I say, it was land purchased in 2022 with the aim to re-wet and restore it, eventually towards lowland raised bog. However, said that we've inherited land that's sort of previously been used for agriculture, so we have a landscape that's heavily drained, heavily enriched, oxidised, compacted peat, which obviously provides a huge challenge for restoration efforts. We're obviously aiming for the exact opposite in nutrient poor, acidic and wet peat. And then I suppose due to that, intensive restoration method that would be needed to convert all that into lowland raised bog, as well as other sort of features and stuff that we need to protect across the landscape, rather than sort of trying to work every single inch of the land, it's aimed to create more sort of stepping stones of bog habitat throughout the landscape, linking up previously restored areas within the peat mass. So just to create really a corridor of habitat between Little Walden and Caddis Head mosses, form a peat extraction site in the southwest of that map there in the pink, and Astley and Bedford mosses, which are triple SI, part of the Manchester Mosses SAC, to the north of Moss Side Farm as well. So just try and create those sort of stepping stones really, and link the habitat. So essentially the 2 ways in which we can do this, and create these sort of stepping stones of bog habitat quickly. I'm using sort of quickly in inverted commas there. I think anyone involved in peatland restoration knows that quickly and peatland restoration don't necessarily go hand in hand, but relatively quickly we can have something that a habitat that resembles a bog, and we can do that in 1 or 2 ways. Firstly, by removing that topsoil completely. So say we've got about 30 to 50 centimeters of enriched sort of, it's almost like the plough layer really, heavily enriched, heavily oxidized and compacted soil layer. So if you want to, you can remove that and it leaves the expose the bare peat underneath, and that obviously coupled with knocking out all your field drains, getting your hydrology right, leaves you an area of bare peat that you can sort of plant straight into then. So we carried out some of these works. We have carried out some of the works across the landscape, but one example I'll give is at Mini Moss 1, which is just by the sort of our office base here, where we carried this out. Yeah, I mean, this land was previously used for a silage fields, so it's again heavily enriched, remove that top surface and then expose the sort of peat surface underneath. And then what we're left with is very sort of obviously about 1 hectare of bare peat, and it's important to sort of plant this up really quickly stabilise the peat, reduce the emissions, and sort of kickstart this habitat restoration, which we did initially straight away after the sort of heavy duty work, the excavator works. The work that had been carried out previously proved to be extremely successful. We had the sort of bare peat layer to go straight into. We had a high establishment of our sort of target species, and with the habitat being transformed from improved grassland to what it is now, starting to resemble something that actually looks like a bog within sort of 2 years. You know, it's incredibly encouraging, and it's a big achievement for those involved. I'm certainly not taking credit for all of that or any of that actually. However, obviously the topsoil removal method isn't sort of without issues. We were fortunate enough that we could use some of the spoil in a ditch that needed to be infilled, but you do need an outlet for the material. And either way, you're going to be left with a big oxidizing mass of peat, which sort of defeats the object when one of the main aims of peatland restoration obviously is to limit carbon emissions that will come from this. So a different method that we use for Mini Moss 2, which is adjacent to Mini Moss 1, similar sort of footprint, about 1 hectare. We'd already done sort of some preliminary works elsewhere, but this was the brainchild of one of our colleagues, Dr. Paul Thomas, who's our senior peatland advisor, and essentially was inspired by soil inversions that you use in like a hay meadow restoration, where you invert the soil to expose the nutrient poor soil underneath. However, you know, we need to do that on a huge scale, to the point where no such sort of deep plough exists to invert the peat layers required. So essentially what you do is you achieve it through, well, double digging really, where you excavate the top surface off and then bury that enriched layer under a cap of about 1 metre of, you know, good quality nutrient poor peat. Again, that coupled with knocking all your field drains out and your re-wetting works, enclosing the area in deep trench bunding to block out any field drains, but also to block any sort of fissures that have been exposed in the peat layers resulting from previous drainage and oxidation. Leaves you with a re-wetted surface peat layer that we can then plant straight into. So this was Mini Moss 2. Again, just bare peat as far as you can see, but it leaves us that sort of nutrient poor peat layer that we can plant straight into. So yeah, although this is approximately the same size as Mini Moss 1, it was done in about half the time. It doesn't leave you with a big pile of material to get rid of, and it can just essentially be achieved by one person in an excavator. You don't need somebody else or another bit of machinery to move the material around site either. So it was done about half the time, and you're not left with a big oxidizing peat mass. However, I suppose a limiting factor of this is that you need the peat depth. You need at least a sort of, well, ideally 1 metre of peat to cap off. So obviously you need over 1 metre towards your sort of clay layers or mineral layers to start with. So if you haven't got this has been a limiting factor in some of our fields where we've got sort of under 1 metre of peat left. So yeah, finally, I suppose I can talk about the LIFE project and how it's helped us in our works and our restoration. So, you know, through these extensive restoration efforts, you know, I've given 2 examples of which are on our doorstep, but we've sort of carried this out across the rest of the landscape at Moss Side Farm, trying to create these stepping stones of habitat. And what it's resulted in is extensive areas of bare peat, or stepping stones of bare peat. So as I say, I've already mentioned previously, but it's vitally important to vegetate these areas as quickly as possible. And this requires a huge amount of Eriophyllum and sphagnum plugs to be planted, as well as, I'm sure anyone who's done a bit of planting here will know that it's a significant amount of time as well to get these areas planted up. So the LIFE project was hugely helpful to us to provide funds that we could not only purchase thousands of plants, but also fund some contracted works to get these planted out. It's greatly beneficial for providing that really important vegetative cover, but also alleviate the pressures on staff and volunteer time as well, that we can focus our efforts elsewhere, or at least just give us a break on the planting. Although we have been doing lots of that since as well. Yeah, so through planting of these target species, again within the right sort of seasonality, another sort of learning curve from these hot, dry summers, but making sure that we get the right time frames, the right seasonality has resulted in us having a high establishment of the plants that we got from the project as well. So yeah, another thing that was highlighted, and this is something that we have, considered previously, and I think it just further highlighted it, was the importance of to have some sort of resilience as well against the bottlenecks in the supply chain. One of the main things we found from buying lots of plants, and I'm sure other people on the call have had this issue, is the sort of demand for bog plant species among sort of different restoration projects across the country. Now that demand is obviously a good thing. It means a lot of our peatlands are being restored, but when you're trying to get a hold of your plants at a certain time of year, it can be quite challenging. So we aim to really try to overcome this, at least in part, over the coming years with the establishment of our own on-site propagation. And I think, yeah, the project just sort of like drove home the real need for us to sort of ramp this up, really. So yeah, we hope to achieve this through working with volunteers, community groups, so that we can use our stocks to boost the target species, propagate these on, and then we can use it for future restoration projects at Moss Side Farm, but also, across the wider National Nature Reserve. Yeah, and then the last slide is just a summary slide from me. So extensive restoration works resulted in areas of bare peat, vitally important to establish bog plants to stabilise the peat, reduce emissions and aid in the habitat restoration. Funding from the LIFE project was hugely beneficial as it helped us to purchase plants, paid for contracted works, and helped reserve staff with planting and establishing these areas. This provides coverage of the bare peat, which is essential to restoring previously drained and rich peat and moving it towards lowland raised bog habitat. Yeah, so I think that was it from me, Lewis.
Thank you very much, James. Yeah, we've done our fair share of cotton grass and sorghum planting, and it does, whilst it's nice, easy work, it's not hard to put the plugs in. It does take a hefty amount of people power to get them all in. And we also, when we came to visit your site, we saw the peat inversion happening. I'm always amazed by the skill of the excavator drivers, but it looked one hell of a technique.
Yeah, I wouldn't fancy doing it myself, and it's something that we found actually is trying to make sure you've got the right contractor and they've got the right brief, and that's something that we're still sort of working on. But it's it's not something I fancy doing myself. So yeah, credit to them.
Yeah, well, bro, thank you very much for that. Cool. I'm gonna hand over to Howard now, who's going to talk us through the Calthorpe Broad NNR work.
Yeah, hello everyone. Howard Jones here. I'm the Senior Reserve Manager for Natural England for the Norfolk Broads NNRs. Quite a lot of NNRs in Norfolk, and includes 5 which are directly managed by Natural England. So Bure Marshes, Ludham and Potter Heigham Marsh, Winchton Dunes, Paston Great Barn, and finally Calthorpe Broad, which this talk is about. You probably all know that the Norfolk Broads are an extensive area of lowland peat, much at or actually below sea level. And the Broads themselves, the open water, are the result of historic peat digging for fuel in the Middle Ages mainly. So just a second, I'm having trouble with my computer today. What's going on? Okay, so Calthorpe Broad is owned outright by Natural England. We have the freehold. It was gifted to us in 1953. It's located in East Norfolk between the villages of Stalham and Seapawling, about 2 kilometres southwest of the coast. It's located on the southern edge of a very shallow natural depression, and about 44.5 hectares in size. And as you'd expect, there's a whole range of different designations, NNR obviously, SAC, SPA, Ramsar site, SSI, of course. The habitats in the site are quite varied actually for a small site like this. There's obviously open water with the Calthorpe Broad itself and an extensive dike network, areas of fen and reed bed, which are then surrounded by wet woodland, which progresses increasingly to drier woodland as you move away from the Broad itself. And to the north of the site, quite a decent area of grazing meadow, which is lowland acid grassland, which is pretty unusual in Norfolk, to be honest. Somebody says they can't see the slides. Is there a problem? Let's see if I can click on now. Can people see slides now? Okay, I'll carry on going. So here's an aerial shot showing part of the site. The open water is Calthorpe Broad itself, which is a shallow peat digging for the area. It's very prone to infilling with typha and potamogetons and other aquatic plants. I mean, is doing its best to turn into a swamp actually rather than open water, and it requires quite a lot of management through trucks or etc. to keep the open water open. You can see the Broad itself is surrounded by fen there, and then around the Broad you've got the wet woodland I mentioned earlier on as well. So next slide, if I can find out how to click it on. There it is. So Calthorpe Broad lies in it sits in the headwaters of the Upper Thurn River catchment, but has no natural rivers in the area, and it's currently thought by the team here and by the wider area team that it's likely the site is drier than it should be to support its features and to make sure the condition of the peat is well maintained. Much of the site is below sea level. Much of the peat area is about between 25 and 50 centimetres below sea level. Intensive drainage in the area. It's a very important area for agriculture. And drainage over the years has caused soil and dike and water body acidification. As a result of this, maintaining water on Calthorpe is really important for maintaining the features and also keeping the peat nice and wet. So bearing in mind that we are concerned about water on the site and the fact that the level of water may not be sufficient, we use LIFE Moor Space restoration funding to commission an eco-hydrological profile of the site. This from a local ecology firm called Hummingbird Ecology. Hummingbird reviewed existing data and LiDAR survey results, topographic surveys, etc., and investigated the site's geology, recorded current parts, communities and habitats, and also as part of investigations, a shallow stratigraphy survey was done to better understand the peat condition and the surface stratigraphy across the site. So coring was completed along two transects running from the northern border along the IDB drain up towards the Broad and then past the Broad towards the southern boundary. Peat depth was investigated and also the underlayers, and it was found to be a combination of various types of silty loam and loamy sand and quite a lot of gravel. So no slowly permeable layers. So obviously that's having an impact upon the ability to keep water on the site. Results of coring along one of the transects. This is transect number 1. You can see the deeply incised internal drainage board drain to the north, that's on the left-hand side, and then the area of open water at Calthorpe Broad towards the southern edge. Coring showed a thick layer of generally well-wetted, humidified sapric peat, some breaching the surface and also some other covered by sandy loam. The Broad itself was shown to be deeply incised with straightish sizes you'd expect, which are the main typical of peat diggings in the area. The peat is underlain by silty loam and sandy gravel, and as said, no slowly permeable materials were found on this particular coring transect. This is transect 2, which is similar, obviously you might expect, because they're quite close together, and there was some sandy loam covering a thick layer of peat with the thickest section towards the midsection where it gets quite deep down to about more than 4 meters. So, as mentioned, maintaining open water on site is essential, and due to drainage of the surrounding landscape for agriculture, direct connection with adjacent drainage dikes have been severed, and the Broad itself is entirely dependent on rainfall, which is very patchy in the area. It's one of the driest areas of the United Kingdom. The dike network has been developed to have 5 exit points onto adjoining drains, but these are fitted with water control structures, simple structures mainly using boards, so we can keep water on site. The water control structures internally then allow us to direct water towards the Broad if needed, or to the northern dikes, which are used by livestock quite a lot for drinking in the summer because that area is grazed. There's no overspill to an adjacent triple SI called Priory Meadow. And as the site is so reliant on rainwater, it's extremely highly vulnerable to drought. The whole area is underlaid by a chalk aquifer at depth, and results from 2 pretty close by boreholes in the area suggests that at Calthorpe the chalk will be overlain by a layer of clay at depth, which then prevents and hinders upward movement of groundwater as well. So showing again how the site is so reliant upon rainfall and keeping water on the site. So we have a very deeply incised internal drainage board main drain, which is shown as the blue line running along the northern reserve boundary. This is extremely deep, and obviously it massively impacts our ability to keep water on site because, of course, water is leaching out through the subsoil into this drain all the time. So in the mid 2010s, a couple of wind pumps were installed on the site to try and lift water from the IDB drainage, as mentioned, into the Broad to try and augment the rainfall. And we had very, very dry summers in 2018 and 2019, and these pumps prevented the Broad itself from drying out, which had happened in other drought situations. So they're having some benefit, most certainly. However, with future predictions of changes to rainfall with climate change, it suggests that rainfall will become more sporadic, more winter based, and we may have longer, drier droughts in the summer. So that suggests that additional measures will need to be taken to ensure the maintenance of fresh water on the site for the interests and to keep the peat in good condition. So as part of the work done by Hummingwood Ecology, funded by LIFE Moor Space, a 5 dip well monitoring transect was installed through the sites. Locations were informed by the eco-hydrological profile which had been created, and by the habitat and findings from the stratigraphy survey. The transect runs from the northern grazing meadows down to and right on the northern fringes of the Broad. The site is extremely well used by a whopping great herd of red deer. There's far too many there, to be honest with you. So we managed to involve volunteers in the project by getting them to go out and build simple deer guards around the dip well. So example being one on the left, which was built by our volunteer team, and the other slides, so the other pictures show some of the range of habitats where the dip wells have been installed. So they cover both dry and wet woodland, they cover the fen areas and also the open water fringes. So while the dip wells are being installed, water table levels were recorded, and this showed a clear declination from the Broad in the south to the ID main drain to the north. The drain itself obviously represents the base drainage level for the site, and sluices prevent direct drainage of the dikes into the main drain, but they themselves are undermined by the very low level of the drain itself. So we were fortunate enough while the project was underway to find some additional funding, and I was able to obtain and install dip well loggers in each of the dip wells, and the plan is now to use the dip wells to continue to map and understand the water table over a period of several more years. Once you understand the hydrology better, we should be able to develop some solutions using evidence base to help mitigate, I hope, the increased likelihood of drought and erratic rainfall patterns affecting the site. Some potential solutions would include additional wind pumps, but we've been looking at the possibility of a solar pump because that will probably work better in the summer. Obviously, it's quite a sunny area. And there has been talk about even bunding the main drain, but you can imagine what the expense would be of that. So that might be an issue in itself. Drainage and abstraction is really important for agriculture in the area, so it's very unlikely we'll be able to change the way the actual level is managed to benefit the site. So it will be on-site solutions, I think, we'll be looking at. There we are. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Apologies for the IT shambles. Any questions, of course, please fire away.
Thank you very much, Howard. No, you did well considering your IT issues this morning. It's always interesting to hear from a site that has too little water. Working on a site that always has too much, it's always interesting to hear the other stroke of the sword. So thank you to all our presenters. Really interesting to hear about the projects that you've got going on. We haven't had any questions come through in our Q&A box, so we'll probably end the webinar here. And if anyone does have any questions that come into their mind afterwards, feel free to drop me a message, and I can send them out to whoever they're directed to and get them answered for you. This will also be popped up on our YouTube channel if anyone wants to rewatch it. So thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully see you at one of our workshops.